Good evening. This is a Devar Torah on Parashat Shemos. I would like to dedicate this Devar Torah as a Leif's Neshama in memory of my mother, Sarah Bas Leib, whose yahrzeit is today. Now, Parashat Shemos is the first Parsha of Sefer Shemos. It is, and Sefer Shemos itself is the Sefer book of the Torah by books of Moses that describe the formation of the Jewish nation. When we ended off Sefer Bereshis, we saw Yaakov and his children and grandchildren were settling. It describes, ends with Yosef's life, and with the message that the Jews are multiplying, exceedingly multiplying, extremely fertile. And this parsha opens with describing who the 12 tribes were, because they're going to have further significance. It then goes on to describe how Pharaoh was getting nervous because of the incredible number of Jews, and because they were moving out into Egyptian society, that if an enemy attacked, at least that was his excuse, they would try to join with an enemy and they would move up. Now, first of all, what about gratitude to Yosef, who had saved Egypt? They say a new king arose. It meant one of two things. Either Pharaoh for his own, was the same Pharaoh from years before, but for his own selfish interest decided to oppress the Jews. The other understanding, it was a new king, and without any gratitude for what had happened before. In any event, he decided the solution was to turn the Jews into slaves. He did it in a tricky way. He called everybody for public service to help build these two cities. Pharaoh even participated the first day. And then gradually after that, Pharaoh quit, so did all the Egyptians, and the Egyptians enslaved the people with incredible harshness. They were supposed to oppress them. They went beyond that and tried killing them and doing other things that was never in Shem's intention. Pharaoh then received from his astrologers and other wise men that there was going to be a child among the slaves who was going to rise up and overthrow his kingdom. They were able to tell him it was a male, but they weren't sure if it was either an Egyptian or a Jewish one. So he first asked the Hebrew midwives to kill baby boys. The names were Shifra and Puah. Actually, it was Yocheved, Moshe's mother, and Miriam. They defied the king's orders. Hashem protected them. So at that point, he ordered the destruction that they had for, some say for 1 day, some say for 30 days, destroy all males, both Egyptian and Jewish. And Yocheved does not know to do with her newborn son Moshe, who they say from the beginning was a very special child. He lit up the entire room because he was such a special neshama that the whole room was showing the organuz, the hidden light that came from him. At any event, after 3 months, she could no longer hide him. And ironically, in prediction, that all the Jewish children had to be drowned, and it said that they will suffer in the water. Now, this was true of Moshe. Ironically, they built a cradle for him with mud, basket. Pharaoh's daughter saw him and rescued him. And Miriam, who had been following to see what was happening, suggested that because Moshe refused to nurse with the Egyptian woman, that she find a Hebrew woman, and she, of course, got her own mother. At 3 years old, he grew up in the palace. And then the Chumash then jumps to when he's an adult, and he goes out one day to see an Egyptian taskmaster beating a Hebrew slave, and he looks around and kills him. Now, that is one thing. The next thing is he has to flee for his life, because when two Jews were arguing with each other the next day, he intervenes and they say, "Who are you to criticize us when you killed the Egyptian yesterday?" He flees to Midian, to the house of Yithro, where he meets, he helps the daughter who a shepherdesses, and he comes to their rescue. He then stays, is given one of the daughters in marriage. And Hashem, one day he comes to the holy mountain of Hashem, sees a burning bush, and after he sees a burning bush, Hashem calls to him, and then tells him he has a special mission to be his representative, God's representative, to lead the liberation of the Jews from Egypt. It will be in two parts: one stopping the slavery, and then a year later liberating them from Egypt. He's worried that the people won't accept him. Hashem gives him various signs. One, a staff of his, which was actually originally the staff of Adam Arishon, is thrown down to the ground and becomes a snake. A second one, he puts his hand in his garment, and it comes out with the disease of Saras, which is incorrectly interpreted as leprosy. He then has a third sign where he takes a jug of water, and it turns into blood. The people believe him. He then goes to Pharaoh, who says, "I do not recognize you, your God." And he says it in 3 stages. When Moshe and Aaron go, all the elders don't. And Pharaoh says in the second pasuk, V'yomer Pharaoh, Mi Hashem yishma b'kolo, lishlach et Israel, lo yedei et Hashem, and gam et Israel lo yishalech. So he's saying 3, as the Or Chaim explains, he's saying 3 things. One, that he does not recognize Hashem. In other words, he for 3 challenges. You think Hashem's so mighty, he can defy me. I'm the rule of the most powerful country in the world. Second of all, I have never heard of a God by the name of Hashem. And even if I heard of one, I'm not content to say an entire nation of slaves. What do you think? In other words, he was saying he was a total unbeliever. He then decides to, as the standard dictator, he decides to oppress them even more heavily, and makes them. They had to build the cities, but he had supplied them with bricks to build the cities. Now he makes them collect their own straw. The people become more and more oppressed. They lose faith in both Hashem and Moshe. Moshe then questions and says to God, "Why did you send me at all? I just made matters worse," and that's how the Parsha ends. Moshe is going to suffer later because of that. He wasn't punished at the time for that lack of speaking such a familiar tone to Hashem. Now, it also the Egyptian magicians knew about this, or without realizing it, because they said that the Jewish children shall suffer in the waters by water, and that prophecy did become true for Moshe, because later on, much later on, he was supposed to speak to the rock and provide water in the 40th year in the desert. Instead, he broke the rock, and for which reason he was not allowed into Eretz Israel. One of the reasons given was because of this lack of faith he had in Hashem at the end of this Parsha. I would like to focus on a few incidents from the Parsha and say that Hashem, at all different levels, is preparing for the eventual liberation of the people. In addition, he's preparing Moshe for leadership. I want to explore on a deeper level who Moshe is. And then thirdly, the incident of the burning bush, which attracts Moshe on Har Sinai. What is this burning bush? What is its deeper significance? Now, looking at the first question, Pharaoh is destroying, killing all the Jewish boys. That's what he's trying to do. Now, the question is, was that his only thing to avoid this future leader who could overthrow him? It actually goes into a much deeper level, because Pharaoh knew that for that liberation of the slaves, the Jewish people, would not occur until there were 600,000 men. Now, what is the significance of the number 600,000? Is that the Torah, from which the entire universe was created, had 600,000 words. And for us to be able to receive the Torah, there had to be 600,000 neshamas, because Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve, the original man and woman, had 600,000 part souls. It was half male, half female. So when we see 600,000 men, that would mean there would also be 600,000 women. When they got out of Egypt, actually there was more with children. The estimate is 3.5 to 4 million people actually left. Something I'll be speaking about in later Parshas Bo, in more detail. In any event, how did Hashem thwart Pharaoh's plan? Because when he threw all the boys into the water, they were miraculously saved. They wound up in the desert, where they were raised by angels. And they have to understand the number of children was immense, because each woman, when she gave birth, had 6 children at a time. And so that's why the numbers could multiply from 70 when Yaakov came down to a much huger number later on. Now, the next question is, who is Moshe? Now, Moshe is a Gilgal, a reincarnation of a few different people. One person he was a reincarnation of was Cain. Cain, or Cain, was one of the 2 sons of Adam and Chava. He had 2 sisters with him. In other words, twin sisters, they refer to it. He was in fact a triplet, one of a triplet. And his brother Abel, had 1 sister. And the ultimate event that occurred was the story of Cain rising up and killing Abel is quite famous. However, there's a deeper theme here. Cain wanted to, had 2 sisters. Hevel wanted one of them as a wife. This was an extra sister. Cain refused. Hevel knocked him down, this coming on top of the fact that Hashem had accepted Hevel's offerings, but not Cain's, led to him becoming angry and striking down Hevel. Now, from here, Moshe was a Gilgal, first of all, of Hevel, and therefore, who was Cain in that generation? Cain was actually three different people, came back as three different people. How could that be? One person, because the souls in those days were very complex, had a number of parts. The main soul comes with three major parts, what we call the Neshama, Ruach, and Nefesh. And so who did they come back as? One was the Egyptian that Moshe encountered on that day when he went out as an adult. Now, who was this Mitri? He was the Nefesh of Cain, reincarnated, and he had done a major sin, because when a certain woman's husband got into the work in the fields, he came in and was with her. She thought it was her husband. That was the only case ever of that happening in the entire period that the Bnei Yisrael were in Egypt. And it's a very unusual wording. Because it says in the Chumash, it says the following: that he saw this the Egyptian man striking a Hebrew man. In fact, according to some, it was the husband of the woman he had been with. And then it says, very interesting language, Yefes ko v'ko, Yira ki ein ish v'yach v'hamitzri v'tamahu v'chol. He went, and it translates, he turned this way and that way, and saw there was no man, so he struck down the Egypt and hit him in the sand. Why does it refer to him as no man? Why does the word he turned this way and that way get repeated? And so what really happened here? Because Cain had killed Hevel, the Moshe, who was reincarnation of Hevel, killed Cain. And the reason it uses the language twice, turning this way and that way, because he was checking out this Mitzri. And he checked out the previous Gilgulim, the previous generations from Cain down, and he realized that, and when it says he turned the second way side, it meant he was checking the future generations that were going to come out of him. It says, Yira ki ein ish. What's that talking about? That is talking about that none of the Gugulim were good. In fact, he was Chayav Misa because of Cain killing, killing Hevel. And after that, he went to check future generations, and there was no worthy person going to come from him. So therefore, he was free to kill him. Now, why did, as explained by Rav Shimshon Astropoli, among others, why did he have to do it in that way? Because he was using Hashem's ineffable name, special name of Hashem, and killed him by spiritual means. One is only allowed, and even at Moshe's level, is only one allowed to do that if it's not going to affect either past history, and they're determined that he was chayav to be killed, and because he was a descendant of Cain, and also the second time, he no few worthy descendants were going to come from him. Now, the second part of Hevel that of Cain that showed up was going to be Korach. Korach was a cousin of Moshe, who in Sefer Bamidbar is going to lead a rebellion against God and Moshe, which I'll be talking about at that time. And that was the so-called Ruach, second part of Kayan's Neshama, that was reincarnated. The third part was of Kayan was the Ruach, was the Neshama, the third highest level of a soul, and that one was Yithro. Now, Yithro was different. He was pure. He eventually converted and joined the people in Israel. But what did he have to do? He had to give one of his daughters to Moshe as a wife, because Cain, of which he was a Gilgal, had refused Hevel. And therefore, that was righted by then. So we see that God is already arranging for the settled issues from past Gilgulim, past generations, and bring things into counting and fixing everything up. Then there is a discussion of this famous burning bush. And this famous burning bush that we're talking about, I'm going to quote the second verse, and says, Yera Amelech Hashem, a love, Vas Eish, Betok Hasena, Yiris Hanei Hasena, Ba'er Ba'esh, and Hasena Enu Akul. An angel of Hashem appeared to him in a blaze of fire from amid the bush. He saw him, and behold, the bush was burning, but it was not consumed. So the question is, how could that happen? It then goes on to say that Hashem called to him from amid the bush and says, "Here I am." He tells him he has to remove his shoes because he's on holy ground. Now, at that time, when it's talking about God, it's using the term Elohim. Now, those two names have a different meaning. Now, when the bush, when he uses the term Hashem, it means his qualities of rachamim, of mercy, of kindness. When he uses the word Elohim, it represents Hashem's quality of strict justice. And here we see something amazing, that when we're going to see this throughout the story of the plagues and liberation from Egypt, is the duality, how things can, for our people, be positive, yet for the Egyptians be disastrous, because the bush itself represents his quality of chesed, indicated by the name of Hashem. And when it talks about, and the fact that it is not consumed shows the quality of the tree, bush shows his quality of mercy. And that's what you're going to see throughout the plagues. While the Egyptians are suffering, we'll see in next week's parsha, one plague after the other. None of them affect the Bnei Israel. And what does the Aish mean? The Aish is a symbol of what's going to happen to the Egyptians, about how they're going to be punished for oppressing the Jews. One final point, and so in other words, Hashem is preparing for the liberation. He's bringing things into balance in a way only Hashem could do, because events can be both good for one side and evil at the same time. For the other, be punishment for one and reward for the other, as we'll see more in next week's parsha. Now, the question is, who is this angel we're talking about? According to one opinion, The angel we're talking about is Michael, one of the major, what's called archangels, one of the major angels. According to another opinion, we explained that all of the major figures have their own angel, and Adam Rishon had his own angel, even Nimrazazel, and there was the Rav of, and he was the Rav, and the Shem Uthiel, there was the Rav of Abraham, was called Tzaddikiel. The Rav of Yaakov was called Raphael. Yosef had Gabriel, and Moshe's was called Zag-El, different qualities. And in other words, all of these angels were on a divine level of Hashem's agents for helping Moshe and helping all of the Avot. And so we see that Hashem has precisely prepared for all of these matters and is now set the stage for the liberation of Egypt, which will occur in next week's Parsha. Everybody should have a good Shabbos and Shabbat Shalom.